I love to have 7 or 8 people that I've networked in the past that I know are working that may be interested. And I love being able to reach out to all those people in order of the ones that I would like to have join our team the most and say, we have an opportunity here and I would love to talk to you about it. Because we've already met, we've already talked, they will take that call every time. And I approach it from a very casual, very friendly way.
Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata, talks with Justin Stiver, the owner of Total Therapy Florida. Justin grew the practice from 1 to now 7 clinics across Florida. Paul and Justin talk through how to hire and retain great therapists at your clinic, the importance of building a continuing education program, and lastly, the effects of the FTC banning non-competes and what it means for the PT industry. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
The one thing that I had today was this morning, I spent the whole morning catching up with Mason, who's one of our PTs, who we about 8 months ago appointed to a new role in the company in charge of clinical education. So he's the director, of all the clinical education side of our business. And he's a PT. And we've started to actually build out this whole side. And I would love to talk to you guys about why we did that and kind of how we're working it. But it's really fascinating. And everybody that I talk to about it, whether it's a new hire during an interview or, they say, wow, I've never heard of a practice your guys' size doing anything like this. So I'm sure that's the kind of content you would like to talk about anyway.
I think
so
that actually sounds really good, man. Let's just jump into it. So you've got this, I think you said it's a clinician on your team named Mason that you promoted. So what's the new role?
So Mason was a PT that we got through a PT that was already working for us that had graduated from the same school that I went to, University of St. Augustine. And he decided to go on and do his orthopedic residency training at USF Health. And following that year residency, he decided to sit for his OCS, which stands for the Orthopedic Certification Specialist that you get through the APTA. It's a tough thing to pass. It's also a very well respected certification throughout the whole entire orthopedic industry. So Mason did that, and then one of his classmates that was at the time with us, he said this guy is like a walking encyclopedia. I don't think he failed it. One test during PT school, I think straight A's. Like he's just unbelievable PT, and you have to hire him. So we met, we hired him, and he quickly worked his way into the clinic director role in our Northport office. And Mason, he's just a great PT, just technically a very, very solid PT. And over the course of 1 or 2 years, with me working on the other skills that are important to be a very experienced director, strong leader, he just became a great dude, huge asset to us. And but I kind of always got that sense that working full time as a clinician wasn't going to keep him around for a long period of time. He's that kind of guy where I could see him teaching, not full-time teaching, because it was also very important to him to be able to practice what he knows in the clinic. So we grew. I think Northport was our 3rd clinic we opened. We grew to where we're at now, and struggled with keeping our clinicians consistent with the skills and the messaging that they're delivering to our patients. So. And that's one tough thing that I think that as practices grow, they struggle with, is making sure that every location is as good as the next and has the same approach and the same message. So it just made sense to move him into that role where we could give him the flexibility to spend some time making sure he follows all the latest evidence-based research and learned all the new skills and techniques out there, which is where his passion lies. The guy can just read this stuff. I can't read a research article without falling asleep after 3 or 4 pages. This guy can do it all day long
Yeah.
and be excited about it. So I just knew that it was not a skill that I was good at.
So, okay. Well, all right. I have two thoughts or two questions, I should say, and you can pick either one and go down that path. So let me lay them out first. So the first is, I think it's interesting that you sort of identified that. I forget exactly how you said it, but you said something along the lines of, you didn't think he'd be with you for a long time if he was just in that clinical setting. And so the first question I think is going to revolve around this idea of like, how do you think about that? Like, is it a certain number of years and all that? So let's put a pin in that, and then you can pick that question if you want. And then the other side of this is ROI. It doesn't matter how big of a practice you are, you've got the same finite amount of working capital and everything else. So when you're making roles like this, where it's a little bit more fuzzy in terms of ROI and stuff like that, how do you think about that? So you can pick either one of those. I'm curious which way you go there.
Yeah, let's start off with the first one. I'll answer that pretty quickly. Basically, Mason wasn't complaining to us about, hey, I'm not happy or whatever. I could tell that his passion was in the details of the clinical side, and that to me is something that's important, but it's also something that we're busy. We're seeing 13, 15 patients per day. And like, you have to just kind of react and treat people. And you can't necessarily treat it like he did with his residency, where he would do case reports on every patient that he saw and, look at the research and he would spend hours. So, each hour that he spent in the clinic with the patient, he would probably spend a half an hour behind the scenes with a book open, researching his decision-making process, all that. And that's just not feasible in the clinic. So he was almost stressing himself out with how perfect everything was. And I could just see it. I mean, the guy was great. Patients loved him. So it's not like he was performing poorly or anything, but I just knew that, hey, that's kind of a rare quality. Honestly, most of our PTs aren't like that. They love the conversations. They love the soft skills. They love, the actual treatments, and they don't really love going back and opening books at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's also what I believe has led our industry to kind of get lackadaisical. And in most industries where 20 years of experience may be a good thing, most of the time, in my experience, I'm going to make some haters out there with this, but most of the time when I see someone with 20 years of experience in the PT world, I run away. Okay. With a couple very notable exceptions. We have some fantastic therapists that have taken the Mason approach throughout their career and become unbelievable. But most of the time it's like, oh, no, that means you're doing everything the same exact way you were doing it 20 years ago. And that's not going to fly in this company. So, and the reason why is because our productivity standards are so high that we have families and everything else. We can't go home and stay on top of all the latest and greatest stuff. So I thought it was an opportunity for me to bring Mason on and do both of those things. So your second question is, how do you, in an industry where you're already pinched with your profit margins and everything else, how do you justify this, right? So it works for us because two things. One, we're seasonal. So we have a big influx of people during season and, 20-30% increase in our volume. And when you have someone in that role, part of him accepting that role was hey, you're my Swiss Army knife now. If someone goes on vacation or someone's sick or we have an influx of patients in one clinic and I need you to treat, you're going to treat whenever you're needed. So, so Mason flexes in there. Like we we were short one therapist and one office for the last 2 months because the person that we hired on a temporary license failed their board exam. So Mason flexed in there and treated. And he's been treating 80-90% for the last 2 months. But out of season in the summertime, he might only treat once every other week, so, and we don't really need him. So he fills that role. And from a revenue standpoint, he's going to end up the year around $100,000 to $110,000 worth of actual revenue for our company. So, he pays his own salary through the patients that he treats. Okay. It's not enough to pay for all the other costs that we have, but it's enough to pay his salary. The other thing that he does is, which is harder to measure, is he generates value to our team. So in this environment where it's very difficult and very competitive to hire and retain employees, having a system in place that he offers us is very important, and it has most likely contributed a large way to us retaining people as well as we do and attracting other people. So you can kind of tie a recruiting cost to his value too. And because we might pay $10,000-$12,000 for this new hire found by this recruiter. Well, if he retains this person for us so we don't have to do that, that's $10,000 or $12,000 of value right there.
Right. So I think maybe even the summary of that last part of that question really is that the ROI is there because he's sort of break even, in terms of the patients he sees and stuff like that. By the way, poor Mason doesn't realize he's going to be the point of this whole episode. So
I know.
we'll have to
think about how I'm talking about this because the poor guy.
Yeah. Well, hopefully Mason doesn't use this to pad his resume and
yeah, exactly.
But
it's funny you say that, because one thing I was going to talk to you about today was ask you if you had seen the FTC ruling on all the non-competes being waived or being made unenforceable.
I mean, we can slice that and dice that topic if you want, because it is a super hot topic across my entire portfolio of investments. But
it's funny because it kind of ties into what we're talking about, because I have had notably 3 or 4 really good PTs that wanted to come on board with us in the last couple of years and ended up not, because they were afraid of that non-compete. One of them did come on board with us and they enforced a non-compete and he got cold feet and backed out. And so I think now having grass that's greener on your side of the fence is going to be even more important in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, and keep me honest here, because I think it's an interesting topic, but I also don't want to bore people or bore you with anything that you don't want to talk about. But it's interesting. So on a purely personal note, I think the rollout of the ban was probably a little bit poorly handled. And what I mean by that, just to be more specific, is that conceptually, I think the idea of protecting, people's right to work is valid. But on the flip side, I also still think it's valid to protect a company's intellectual property and things like that. So an outright ban just kind of seems strange, considering that, not to get into like employment law here too much, but there's already precedent for example, exempt employees and non-exempt employees. When you think about taxes and withholding and all that stuff, it just surprises me that, something similar wasn't considered here, where, and I'm not going to pick on PT or OT practices. Let me just use the example of a burger joint, like a hot dog joint or whatever, right? It's like, practically speaking, I could see why somebody would want a non-compete in place if you're the one that's coming up with the new processes for how to ship fresh beef or whatever around the country. I can see why you'd want to protect that. That's core IP. On the flip side, it doesn't seem right that somebody that might be flipping the burgers at your location in Kentucky should be prevented from or prohibited from working at another burger joint, across the street. So it's, obviously people don't join this podcast or watch this podcast for politics, but I just think it was kind of weird. That being said, though, Tony Maritato posted something on LinkedIn the other day that I thought was interesting, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I know Tony's going to hear this, so I don't know that Tony has an angry bone in his body, but we'll see. He posted something the other day where he said something along the lines of, "Hey, here's this, non-compete ban coming into effect. Now more than ever, PT should think about moonlighting through other services like Luna, physical therapy, and things like that." That's really interesting. I'm curious how people would react to that too. Like, I don't know if that's something you want to talk about here, but
Well, I would say I to a fault probably, if I'm not involved in the politics or the decision making behind something, like obviously I am not involved in this FTC ruling, that I truly don't take 2 seconds to sulk in the negatives of it, and I just look for the opportunities in it. So I would say that I agree with you. If I sat down there and really talk to myself about this issue, I would probably disagree with what happened on a few different levels. Um, or like you said, the way that it was rolled out. But because it doesn't matter how I feel, then I think I just take it as, where can we pivot and take advantage here? And I think to Tony's topic, I would say, you know what, if moonlighting for Luna is a better opportunity than I can offer my own team, then I good for them and shame on me, and maybe it works for that person. And, and honestly, one thing I've learned recently, and, is everything doesn't have to work out perfect for you to make the best out of a situation. So like, I would love to have, actually, there's a few cases right now in my clinics. I would love to have someone that wanted to moonlight for another company, especially during off season or something like that, where I don't need them,
Right.
And as long as I do what I'm supposed to do, they're going to keep coming back to my company because we offer something that's special or
Well,
great.
and that, I think that's the key point right there, is that, what you just said there, I think is the point that is the part that I hope most other business owners listen to, is that, you can choose to grumble and all these things, but these decisions are way above all of our pay grades. So instead of sulking about it, it's really like, where's the opportunity? And I think the part that I hope people really take into consideration here is that the way that you think about employee attraction and retention, like in a previous episode you and I did, you talked about how there was free housing included with, your I think with your interns or something like that. And now on the other side of this, and so that's sort of like a benefit or a perk that's really hard for anybody else to beat. It's a creative way to attract the best talent or a larger pool of talent. Um, and then as we talk about Mason today, for example, when you think about retention, just the fact that you found a way that not only meets the financial needs of the company, but potentially also meets his career ambitions. That's a fantastic way of thinking about employee retention. And so, when you think about it as other practice owners might be, it's like, you don't have to offer the same thing that you do, but it's the way you think about it that I think is really important. And these sorts of rulings force everybody, whether they like it or not, to really think hard about what their real differentiator is. I mean, why should somebody work at your practice versus somebody else's practice? It often does not come down to just what the compensation is going to be, right? Like, to say this more bluntly, I think one of the things that people on the, people don't realize sometimes is that compensation is not just how much money you get paid, but it's the full package. Now, to be fair, most full packages are just a paycheck. but what you're offering, for example, to your employees, and I think a few other smart, forward-thinking ones should be doing, is, a couple more intangible but valuable kind of add-ons that they couldn't get anywhere else.
Not everyone's motivated by the same things, and not every industry is the same. So I could see how this ruling could affect a different industry in a total different way. But I'll say in the PT world, there's no intellectual property in the PT world. The worst damage you could do in the PT world is take if you've built a following and you're taking that following elsewhere.
Right.
But that's not really, I mean, that's honestly also the fault of the company that you're leaving, because you're building, we build a following, but around our brand and around our team, and we've never felt hurt. I mean, we've never had a therapist leave, knock on wood, we've never had a therapist leave to go to a competitor of ours. I've had therapists leave to move out of the town or change careers, but I've never had one leave to go to a competitor. I think that's a compliment to our team. But also, build we don't allow we practice that team mentality. So when someone comes in the door, they might like one of our therapists, but they're going to see all of them and probably like them all. And in order to have an atmosphere where you have that, you have to do something like we're doing with Mason, because you have to elevate your whole team to being exceptional, which is not an easy task. It's super easy to hire a really good PT and build a brand around that person, because that's, they're doing all the work. And but if that's your choice to do that, then you're putting at risk. You're putting at risk the fact that you're going to get hurt more if that person ever leaves.
Yeah. It's and again, keep me honest if you want to go a different direction in this conversation, but this topic of non-competes, again, people can choose. I love the way you said it earlier. Like, people can choose to sulk about it and grumble about it, but the fact is that it's way above all of our pay grades here. But what it does is sort of forces everybody to have that harder discussion internally about what exactly are we concerned about and what exactly are we trying to protect. Because, if the concern is, like, to your point of what you just sort of alluded to there about like patients maybe going with a therapist that's leaving, well, you can't completely protect yourself against that. Like, no amount of contracts will protect you from that. But you can think about non-solicit agreements where, as part of the employment, if they leave, and I'm not speaking to you directly, right? But just in general for anybody listening, it's like non-competes, why non-competes really took off is because, from a legal standpoint, they tend to be a deterrent that is cheaper than the possibility of litigation later on. I don't think there's actually been very many successful prosecutions of non-competes. They really are just more of a deterrent. But now that they're gone, what's left? Well, it's going to force companies to really evaluate whether they have strong enough non-disclosure agreements with their employees and ex-employees. And it's going to force them to make sure they've got strong non-solicit agreements with those employees and previous employees. And again, I'm just pretending to play lawyer here, but this is sort of what I was talking about with my portfolio founders last week, is that, look, let's just say, in your case, let's just say Mason. Poor Mason is the scapegoat for today's episode. But let's just say Mason decides to leave, despite all the amazing things you do and the opportunities you've created that he probably couldn't get anywhere else. Let's just say he decides to leave. Well, you can't ever stop a patient, for example, that says, God, I just love Mason, I'm going wherever Mason goes. You can't stop that. But what you can do is say, hey, listen, Mason, we wish you the best of luck, but just a reminder, you've got a non-solicit agreement here, so you cannot contact any of our existing patients and let them know where you're going.
Right.
And that's kind of unfortunately what's left, and even on the non-disclosure side, like, you clearly have a process. Now, you did, to be fair, kind of allude to how you think about ROI on this role on this show, but there's clearly a process of how you thought about structuring the role in a way that is ROI driven for the company and for him and all that. The non-disclosure would prevent him from maybe copying that process and that model and giving it out somewhere else. So it's not perfect, but go
It's
ahead.
not perfect. And like you said, it's more of a deterrent, because it's, I mean, even how would you, or most small practices wouldn't probably pick the fight of going beyond threatening or, anyway, I mean, going to litigation over a process, unless you're talking about intellectual property that's very, very valuable and easily determined that valuation. But how would you value?
Well, you know how this plays out, by the way, just from a personal set of experience. So just for context for the listeners, like, so I've invested in a little over 3,200 companies now in about 20 years. Over the years, we've seen a lot of litigation or potential litigation around non-competes. Only one has ever succeeded, and that was after years of litigation where they had to do discovery, and they proved after almost $500,000 of legal fees spent on both sides. That's when they proved that the employee left with a USB drive and took it to the new place. But for every other case, that was one out of probably 300 or 400 cases that I've seen in the last 2 decades. I can tell you exactly how it plays out. A company that the employee departed from accuses the employee of violating the non-compete, which they might have signed already, right, in the past. And so, because they can't like sue the company that hired them. It's not the hiring company's obligation, right? So the company will sue the employee and say, "Hey, you need to prove that you didn't, you need to, you've damaged us." To your point, you've damaged us because you left and went somewhere else. But 100% of the time, they respond back, or the employee's attorney responds back with, "You're violating our right to work." And that's why
Yeah,
these things are hard to litigate, because a PT can't, I mean, for the most part, I'll just use a PT as an example. And again, we're just playing attorney here, but just for the listeners here, this is why this whole argument is so moot at this point, is that a PT by definition has to put their hands on somebody for the most part, and so, okay, there you are in central South Florida, and you could argue, okay, there's lots of places around and all that, but realistically, like, let's say you put like a piece of paper in front of them that says you can't be a PT with any of our competitors within 30 miles. Well, now you've violated their right to work. and so anyway, all I'm trying to say to anybody listening to this is that the sooner you put aside the frustrations and the grumbling of what this is, the sooner you're forced to realize that the non-compete wasn't protecting you anyway. Like, it's
exactly.
not enforceable.
And who wants to retain someone in their company that doesn't want to work for them?
Exactly. I mean, I think this opens up the topic of, like, and if you want to go down this path, this opens up the topic, a broader topic of, like, the changing workforce too,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm 43, so I think I'm Gen X. I don't really know.
Yeah, you're probably at the start of them.
Yeah, I guess, right? But it's like, there's the boomers say that everybody, it doesn't work. The millennials say that nobody cares about their feelings. Nobody really likes anybody else, and as employers, I think most employers sort of fall into that false argument of complaining about everybody else. But the sooner we realize that, like, every generation's motivated slightly differently, and frankly, every person is motivated slightly differently, the sooner we can create roles that make them want to be there.
Exactly. And that's why when I was listening to your podcast that you released this morning about hiring and all that stuff, and it was great content. You know, I, from a more local small business standpoint, I like to be a little bit less formal with my hiring, and I don't even call it hiring. I call it networking, because we've built something through a lot of effort and thought, and we built something very purposeful that we're very proud of. And I'd just like to go around and talk to people and get to explain to them what we have going on, and ask them what they're up to, and ask them, what their goals are. What do you see yourself doing in 5 years? What do you like about your company you're with now? What don't you like? And then really, I'm just trying to think, is this going to work? Is this going to be a win-win for both people? Is there something we can, is there some kind of win-win scenario? Because I think that's honestly what you have to have.
Right.
And I don't, like, this next week, I have 2 interviews with a PT. I have no interest in hiring them. I have no spot for them. But we're meeting over beers Monday and Wednesday after work with 2 different PTs, because I've heard good things about them. One of our PTs plays basketball with one of their boyfriends, and they were talking and about our company, and then it gave me an opportunity to say, hey, let's meet, and I started thinking about the people working for me, some of my key people that, and 2 or 3 of them I've met that same exact way, that we did not hire them right away. We met, they were working at another company, they were happy. I kind of introduced myself, networked, we saw each other, out a couple times, and then eventually something changes and then we connect.
See,
And
I love that actually, because you're recruiting. You're always recruiting.
yeah, I hate hiring. I like interviewing. I hate it. I suck at it. I I hate putting ads out on Indeed or anything like that, because I'm attracting these people that I just don't think are going to work well. I love to have 7 or 8 people that I've networked in the past that I know are working that may be interested. And I love being able to reach out to all those people in order of the ones that I would like to have join our team the most and say, we have an opportunity here and I would love to talk to you about it. And because we've already met, because they've already had we've already talked, they will take that call every time. And I approach it from a very casual, very friendly way. And I was kind of laughing because I started doubting myself when I was listening to your podcast this morning, because I was like, man, I'm not doing any of those things,
I'm sorry.
and I totally see why it's important, and I think the larger and you get, and it could become even more important. But from a local standpoint, I don't think there's any replacement for, just like you said, always be recruiting and not hiring.
Well, and see, that's the thing is like, look, and I'm not saying this to you, it's really more to the listeners, but here's the thing. We all have the same 24 hours in the day, and we all have the same mix of priorities pulling us in different directions, whether it's kids or sports or whatever, right? And the thing that I don't think is discussed often enough is that, when you particularly think about practice owners and entrepreneurs and that sort of like group of people, regardless of whether it's local business or multinational, it's all the same, really. There's a million things that you got to do. There's no doubt about it. But there's 3 core functions that you can never overlook, even though people tend to overlook them in way too much. Number 1, you got to set the mission, vision, values of the company ASAP. It'll make more sense later, and we'll talk about that if you want. The second thing is you can't run out of money. That's job number 2. And then job number 3 is you're supposed to always be recruiting, because recruiting and hiring are not the same. And I might get some haters for this too, but the reality is that in broad strokes, hiring is the act of putting a shingle out there and saying, I need a butt that's breathing in this seat now. And while that might be what you really want, recruiting is different. And recruiting is saying, here's what we believe, here's what we do, here's what people say about us, and let people get attracted to that. Like, you actually want to repel people that don't like that,
Exactly.
And recruiting feels a little bit more expensive. And by the way, not recruiting in the sense of paying a recruiter, that's a different problem, but recruiting in the sense of making it a place that people want to be at. A good proxy metric for this, I think, is that every time you post a job somewhere, and I was just talking about this with our portfolio last week, actually, I said, like, a good proxy for this, if you really want to measure the difference between recruiting and hiring, every time you open a job posting, set a timer for 24 hours and see, number 1, how many applicants you got, and number 2, how many of those applicants actually passed the first screening. And the fact is that, like, you can game that metric. Like, if you want to game the metric, you can just post the job on Indeed or, post it on your social, and you'll get like 3,000 jokers that apply. No offense to the jokers, right? But they're gonna just throw their hat in there. But that's why that second metric is really important. What percent of them were actually that made it past the first screen? And if that percentage is like, 1% of the applicant pool within 24 hours is reasonable, that's not a good thing. That means nobody knows you, right?
Right.
Um, so and I think whether you know it or not, I think, the fact that you do all these things and um, these perks that you're essentially giving to your employees and creating like the more you think about how to shine a spotlight on them publicly, I think the more the brand builds and the aspirational people want to work there. And by the way, this is not like, I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying, like, I'm just using it as an example here. Like, every practice owner that I talk to seems to think that they're differentiated by how hard they work or how many letters are behind their name. and at the end of the day, like in your case, like the reason you're not, I mean, I'll just be really blunt and you tell me if you disagree. I think the reason that you don't have to see patients every day, like you, Justin, the owner of that firm, I think the reason that you don't have to see patients every single day yourself is not because you've worked harder than anybody else. It's because you built the machine that is the business. And in order to build that machine, you found some way of balancing your time in the early days between running the business and building the business. And those are
Sure.
two very different things that I don't think practice owners talk enough about
And
publicly
there's
anyway.
always, and the things that, I mean, treating patients and things like that, there's this I'm going to be honest, Mason is a better PT than I will ever be in my life. And,
Yeah.
he did better. He's probably born with more brain cells. He he did better in school and paid more attention. He he's studied more. He's more interested in the academic side than I'll ever be, and he's better fit for patient care or training PTs than I am. So as soon as I recognize that and happily pass that baton on to somebody more capable than me, I'm very involved. And, if we get back to this position's Mason's and director of clinical education, director of education, whatever you want to call it. And if a practice owner is listening to this thinking whether or not this is feasible to do in there, it's something that you have to ask yourself, is my time best spent on clinical care and training my therapist, or is my time better spent on the business? And
Yeah.
definitely for me, that answer was on the business and growing the business. And I that being said, I still stay very close to because we're still developing this out, and I still stay very close to it. I make sure that it has my style to it, but I actually enjoy that. I enjoy putting my style or my flair onto things, but I don't enjoy doing all the legwork to get it to from point A to point B. And Mason is perfect for that because he has the skills to do that. Now, there's other benefits to this, and one thing that we talked about today, him and I, were, you know, the difference in different therapists and how they engage with Mason, because Mason is this role where we try very hard not to make it like an academic, like I don't want them to feel like they're going back to school and they're being graded and stuff like that. I truly want to make this feel like a value added thing where we're going to help develop you at whatever pace you want to be developed. And basically the pitch to our therapy team is like, hey, we know that you don't have time to pay attention to every research article and every new technique and every skill out there. We have someone that does have that time and they love doing it, and they're going to repackage it in a Reader's Digest version back to you, and they're going to tell you the Cliff Notes version of what you need to know, and then mentor you to whatever depth you need. And it honestly is something where our team's like, thank God, because I am insecure about my vestibular rehab skills, and something we didn't learn a lot in school, and I really don't have the time or the energy to become proficient in this. Well, okay, we have someone that's going to help you do that. But then also it goes one step further. Like Mason, we have a set schedule on how he mentors and how he'll treat alongside a new employee, you know, a lot more frequently in the first month or two. You know, we don't do any mentoring the first 3 months with the team. We let them get their feet wet and we let them learn the EMR system and we let them, you know, that kind of thing. But then after 90 days, we start to bring Mason in and he'll shadow them or he'll treat alongside them at least 5 times and in the next 90 days. And then he'll kind of give them an action plan like, hey, based on what I'm seeing, here's the things that I think you can improve upon and what things do you feel like you need to improve on? And we kind of compare notes and we come up with a plan that we review every 12 months and see, making sure that we're making progress. And it gives our team the support system where they feel like they're developing their own skills as a PT. Now, that being said, not every therapist in the company is as engaged in what he's doing or what we're doing than others. Well, to be honest with you, we're always recruiting, and you know, I hope I'm not breaking any like HR laws here, but you know, when we are recruiting, if Monday I find that this person is a rock star and I want them to work with our team, there's a good chance I'm going to make a space for them, you know, and that space is probably going to come from somebody who I feel like is the things that may factor in are how engaged are you in our clinical education? Like, because it tells me a lot about somebody, how much they're willing to advance themselves as therapists as well.
Right.
So if you have that person that's kind of blowing us off and not really interested, you know, isn't interested in our culture, our team as much, and you kind of just you may make that decision. Like, I would rather make room for this new therapist to come in that's highly engaged in these things. So it creates like you know, I think it was that book by Ray Dalio, Principles, where he talked about how he built his fund and he did it on this competitive level where, like, if you knew that you came and worked for his company, you needed to be serious about developing and being the best of the best, you know, and that's what we're trying to develop. Our culture is we want our team to be the ones that really care about clinical excellence. And you're going to get that by participating in these things. And if you're not interested in it, then you're not a good fit for us, and we're not a good fit for you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.